Hi there, good afternoon, everybody. Want to welcome you all here to the Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show. So, we're back with that new channel show that I've been doing once a month, one that took over from Playlist, which is called Rock Bands and Artists A to Z. And this today is the letter B. So, this is the second episode. This was actually a fairly, for the probably the top four, that was probably fairly easy, kind of the same as last month's A's. However, the last selection was a little bit more difficult. There was quite a few other artists that I wasn't quite sure I wanted to include. Came down to basically two guys or two artists, and I chose this one primarily because although the other artist has quite a few albums I like, this one had an album that was a masterpiece and outstanding, and then had a couple of others that were really good as well. So we're going to go with that artist. So I'm not going to do this in any particular order, although more likely it's going to be alphabetical because that's the way I took them off the shelf. So we're going to stick with that. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm giving you 5 artists in the letter B, or bands in the letter B, that I think if I was doing a top 5 list, these would be the artists in it. Now they're not like I said, they're not in the favorites or least favorite order. They're basically just alphabetically here. So we're going to go with the first one. This is one of the oldest, if not the oldest artist for me in rock history, the one that I got into fairly heavily early on, and they were my first favorite rock band, and we're talking about Bachman Turner Overdrive, BTO, or Bachman Turner Overdrive if you prefer. I always liked this kind of, I guess you would call it their logo, the BTO with the maple leaf beside it in a gearhead. I've always kind of liked it, and this was one of the better covers as well. Is their debut album, which some people would say is one of their best albums. It's definitely one of my favorite of their albums. I like most of their stuff quite a bit. They've got, I believe, 12 studio albums in all. I own all but the very last one. Of course, if I see it, I'll get it. I also, there's an album out called Bachman Turner, which I also consider a BTO album, even though it doesn't have the overdrive, and they couldn't use it at the time because of ownership of the name. BTO belonged to Rob Bachman, and now that he's passed away, it has reverted back to Randy Bachman. But I always thought of it as a BTO album. It's not, to me, it's not really a great album, but it does have some decent stuff on it. This album kind of set the tone for me. This was the first one I ever owned, and was also the first one I ever listened to. Lots of really good stuff on it. They have that sound that's kind of a bluesy kind of hard rock sound. There are some songs on here that have a bit of a jazz, not on this particular album, although there might be one. Blue Collar Man might be one. But there are some songs in their discography that are very kind of jazz oriented and jazz, hard rock jazz kind of feeling to this album. Randy liked that kind of stuff, and so he incorporated it into some of the music. They have some pop kind of commercial sounding tracks as well, but I basically think of this as a hard rock band. They have a very beefy sound, very hard rockish sound throughout their discography. They also have a lot of kind of commercial sounding hits. Hey You, Ain't Seen Nothing Yet, Taking Care of Business, Let It Ride. These are all well-known tracks by this band. They were huge in Canada, and they did have some success in the States as well. Definitely, to me, they're kind of underrated in the rest of the world, but not here in Canada. One of the best bands we've ever produced, and one of my favorites. Well, that's my first one for today, Bachman Turner Overdrive, or BTO. Next up, we're going to go to one of the most well-known, if not the most famous band in history. I don't know if they're the best band of all time. There's been much debate amongst me and people on the channel about whether they're the greatest band of all time. I guess that's very subjective. Sales-wise, they're definitely number one, probably the most famous for sure. And we're talking about the Beatles. Beatles have some really, really strong albums. The early albums are all okay. Now, some people don't really like that early Beatles stuff. They consider that more of a commercial pop stuff that a lot of teeny boppers and teenagers loved. And of course, they were had a huge female following. But as they developed and become, I guess you would call it, into their experimental phase of their existence. I'm going to stick with that. I won't say too much more about it. They started becoming much more inventive in their music style. You could use the word progressive. Maybe they were one of the first progressive stuff on their albums, but also just experimenting with sounds and music and all kinds of different, to me, genres. One of the most versatile bands for sure. Instrumentally, I never thought of them as being great. Musically and instrumentally are two different things. Musically, they were very inventive and one of the leading bands in exploring different types of music and instruments as well. I don't think they were like one of the top best instrumental bands of all time. I don't think they qualify there, but they had among the better vocalists as well. I think their harmony vocals, were the strength of their vocal format, and maybe not as much individually, but more so together. Some of their album covers are quite good. This is being my favorite album by them. I love this art on here quite a bit. Every album was absolutely filled to the brim with classic rock songs that just about everybody would know. They had more stuff on the radio probably than anybody, sold more albums than anybody, were more well known than anybody. And even though it's been 60 years since they produced that album, most people still know their music because their music still gets a ton of play. This particular album, of course, my favorite, has a couple of my favorite songs by them. Taxman is on here. You've got some of the more famous stuff on here too, like Eleanor Rigby, Yellow Submarine, and so on. But they just have, probably for me, from Rubber Soul right through to the White Album, are absolutely top shelf albums. There's about 4 or 5 of them in there. Really solid albums. And then they got a few albums after that that are quite solid as well. Maybe not. Yellow Submarine kind of comes right after White, the White Album. And to me, it's a bit of a dredge album. I'm not a big fan of Let It Be either, but the other album in there, Abbey Road, really solid album. And then some of their earlier stuff, which was more poppy, I kind of like that versions of the Beatles quite a bit too, because it brings out their harmonies more. So, very strong band, deserves a lot of attention. Even if you don't really like the Beatles, everybody likes some song by the Beatles. It's just inevitable. There's just too many good ones. I don't think they're a top. They're definitely not in the group one or the top album or the top bands by me, but they're definitely right in there solidly in the group two. Could end up in that top thing eventually. Some of their albums are still fully under exploration from me, the White Album being the main one. But, yep, just really solid band. Had to be in this B list. So now we're going to move on to the next group, which is Black Sabbath. This is my favorite album by them. At least it is at the moment, and that could change once I do the rankings. I will listen to them heavily and decide if it still holds that title. But this band has more masterpiece albums for me than any other band. I think there's 7 in total that I consider masterpieces. Nobody else is at that level. Very metal-like. Well, I wouldn't even say that. Very heavy blues, hard rock, metal elements to this band, and got even more metal when they got to this stage once they took on Dio as their singer. I do like this picture a lot too. It's one of my favorite by Black Sabbath. Yeah, so a band with a lot of stuff going on. So people would often just think of them as a metal band, but they are a lot more to them than just that. Early on, they had some progressive stuff in there, some folky stuff in there, some classical stuff in their music. As they moved along, they became more metal and heavier than they were with the early Ozzy era, which is kind of strange since Ozzy's a metal, full-on metal guy himself. But that's the area in which I see them as being a little bit different. Is that early stuff? Those first 5 albums were really exceptional. For me, Sabotage is good. Technics is okay. I like Never Say Die quite a bit. I know that album takes a little bit of a hit from people, but I personally like it a lot. And then the 2 Dio albums that came after, really good. And the Ian Gillan album, fantastic as well. And I haven't really explored the Tony Martin era, so I can't really make too much comments about it. But once I get through it, I will have plenty to say about it, I'm sure. And then the final album, 13, I thought was really good. It's really a return to form, very similar to their debut album. So, yeah, great band. Love them. Probably my favorite B band. No doubt about it, really. Next up is the other member of that Black and Blue, which is Blue Oyster Cult. This is BOC. I chose this album because I love the artwork. I think this will ultimately be my favorite album by them, but I won't know until I do the ranking, which isn't scheduled immediately or in the near future, as I've got quite a few more of their albums that I want to get and listen to before I make any decision. But from top to bottom, this album is just proliferated with some really great songs. Among my favorite songs, Career of Evil, Subhuman Dominance and Submission, Harvester of Eyes, Flaming Telepath, Astronomy, and there's a couple other tracks on here good. And then this one also has some bonus stuff, which is really good too. Borman the Chauffeur and Mommy, which are all really good stuff. This is a strong album, lots of good stuff to it. I kind of think of Blue Oyster Cult as very versatile. All their albums are quite different, and that's understandable. All 5 of them sang at one point. Some albums have all 5 of them singing. And the albums are all quite different. So the White albums, the first 3, you've got some harder stuff on Mystery and Mutations. And maybe the first album is pretty good. This one here has a lot of different sounds to it as well. And they moved on. Some quirky stuff on the next album, and then some heavier stuff on the albums that came after that. And then you've got, of course, Fire of Unknown Origin, which also has a kind of a spacey feel to it as well. Very metalish and almost maybe a little bit of a proggy feeling as well. So really good albums, really good band. Definitely a top band for me. And then the last one, which was the one I chose last, we had 3 or 4 competing bands that I wasn't sure if I wanted to put in. Bands like Blondie and David Bowie, definitely in there. But I chose this one because of this particular album, Boston's debut. Their second album is also quite good. Third album kind of goes down a bit, but it's still really good as well. And after that, they kind of disappeared. They could have been a much higher band for me if they just had more albums, but it wasn't to be. But the ones they did put out there are quite strong. Some people love this album and love this band and think of this as one of the greatest rock bands of all time. Definitely More Than a Feeling is one of the great rock songs of all time, in my opinion. But this album is quite strong, as is their second album, which I think is maybe a little bit underrated. Should get a lot more credit than it does. But really strong band. Very clean sound to their music, production-wise. Very produced very well for the time period. They've got that special kind of sound to their guitars. Kind of heavy, kind of, I would call it a hard rock. Almost it feels proggy, but I don't necessarily think of it as prog at all. and some of their very commercial, successful stuff as well. So that's the final band for today, Boston. So I'll give you the bands in case you came in late. Boston is one of them. Blue Oyster Cult, or BOC if you prefer. Black Sabbath. The Beatles. And of course, Bachman Turner Overdrive, or BTO as they're often called, and some great stuff in their discography as well. So that's the 5 bands for today's rock artist A to Z. I hope that you've enjoyed this letter B, and we will see you all next month for letter C. So take care, have yourself a good one, and goodbye here from the Prog Monster.